The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, quiet, and something deeper, an undercurrent of tension that clung to the air like dust. Danielle Owen sat beside the sterile bed, her gaze never leaving the unconscious man before her. His breath came shallow, his body a mere shadow of the powerful Mafia boss she had once resisted. The heart monitor beeped with steady precision, yet to her, each sound was a painful reminder of the uncertainty hanging between them. The life she knew was already slipping through her fingers, but in this moment, she could barely hold onto her own heart. Walter Milani, the man who had haunted her thoughts for months, lay in a coma, perhaps fighting for survival. And as she sat in silence, Danielle whispered what she'd never dared to say before. "I love you, Walter. I've always loved you." Her voice trembled, a raw confession spilled from her lips, one she never expected him to hear. Yet, somewhere in the stillness, something shifted. Unbeknownst to her, Walter's consciousness stirred, his mind alive despite his body's stillness. His chest tightened, and in that dark silence, her words echoed, searing through him like a fire. The woman he had long pursued had finally given herself to him. But in this frail moment, Walter was more than just the Mafia boss. He was a man, longing for the love he never thought he'd receive. Hey, my beautiful family. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sticking with me. Your love and support mean everything. If you're excited for today's story and ready to soak it all in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I've got another captivating story lined up for you, and believe me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Danielle had never been one to believe in fate, but the night she met Walter Milani, she couldn't shake the feeling that something larger had pulled them together. It was the kind of night that was almost forgettable, just another double shift at Raldi's, the upscale restaurant where she worked as a waitress, invisible to the world around her. Her legs ached from hours of walking on the polished floors, her stomach gnawing from hunger as she moved between tables, her mind drifting far away from the glittering wine glasses and the clink of silverware. She was used to the empty, mechanical rhythm of her shifts, but nothing could have prepared her for the man who would walk into her life that evening. The restaurant was bustling with the usual crowd, high society types, the rich and the powerful, effortlessly spending more in a night than she made in a month. Danielle was accustomed to their indifferent glances, their fleeting interactions. But then there was him, standing in the doorway like he owned the place, his eyes scanning the room with a sharpness that made the air crackle. He was tall, imposing in a way that made everyone in the room seem to hold their breath. His suit, dark and tailored to perfection, clung to his broad shoulders, exuding wealth and power. It wasn't until she turned a corner, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, that she collided with him. The glasses tipped, the champagne splashing in slow motion, sparkling in the dim light. Danielle froze, mortified. But before the disaster could unfold, his hands shot out, steadying the tray with an ease that left her breathless. His touch lingered a moment too long on her wrist, sending a strange warmth spreading through her. She looked up, meeting eyes the color of midnight, deep and endless. "Careful," he said, his voice smooth and low, an accent thickening the words like velvet. "These floors are treacherous." Danielle couldn't speak at first, too caught up in the way he watched her, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. She could feel the weight of his gaze, possessive in a way she couldn't name. His presence, so magnetic, unnerved her. She opened her mouth to apologize, but he cut her off. "What's your name?" His voice was softer now, almost intimate. "Danielle," she said, breathless, feeling the world narrow down to just the two of them. He tested the name on his tongue like it was something rare and expensive, a smooth sound. "Danielle," he repeated, almost as if savoring it. "You're new here, I think." 3 weeks, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. She was unnerved by the way he held her attention, the way the entire room seemed to fade into the background when she spoke to him. "Then you need a guide," he said with a dangerous, almost playful smile. "Someone to show you where all the treacherous spots are." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. And even though every instinct screamed for her to refuse him, to walk away from the dangerous man in front of her, something in her pulled her closer. As the night wore on, he stayed in the restaurant, watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, observing with a calculating intensity that made her skin tingle. She had always kept people at arm's length, but with him, that distance didn't seem possible. She couldn't quite understand why she felt the pull, but she knew she wasn't the only one. He made no secret of it. And by the end of the night, when he was waiting by the door, leaning casually against a black Mercedes, his dark eyes locked onto hers as if he were waiting for her to make the choice. "Let me take you home," he said. And though every fiber in her body screamed to refuse, she found herself sliding into the car, unable to deny the electricity that sparked between them. In that moment, she knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. The danger, the pull of his world, it was inevitable now. And yet, she couldn't resist. The hospital room had become a second home to Danielle, though it felt more like a prison. The sterile white walls, the constant beep of machines, the smell of antiseptic, everything about it clung to her like a suffocating fog. She had stopped counting the days since Walter's accident. His violent confrontation with a rival Mafia faction had left him battered, his body a mere shell of the man he had been. He was alive, but barely. Each time she walked through the double doors of the ICU, her heart squeezed in her chest. She couldn't seem to stop herself from searching his face for signs of recognition, as though if she stared hard enough, if she whispered the right words, he would open his eyes and come back to her. But every time, the silence was the same. His eyes remained closed, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The machines that kept him tethered to life were the only signs of movement in the room, beeping steadily in the eerie quiet. Danielle sat at his bedside every day, her hand resting lightly on his, as if she could somehow will him back to the world. She spoke to him, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She told him everything, the things she never said when he was conscious. She told him about the nights she lay awake thinking of him, the way his presence had haunted her from the very first moment they met. She confessed the depth of her feelings, even though she had pushed them aside for so long. It was impossible to ignore the guilt that gnawed at her. She had refused him for months, rejected his advances, even when her heart had screamed to be near him. Now, as she watched him lying lifeless in front of her, she wondered if she had made the wrong choice. If only she had allowed herself to love him sooner. If only she had let him into her world when he had so desperately tried to be a part of it. She had thought his world was dangerous, that it would consume her. Now it was his absence that felt like the greatest danger. Her mind would replay the moment she had heard the news, Walter's violent attack, the explosion that had nearly taken his life. The phone call from one of his men, telling her he was in critical condition. She had dropped everything, rushing to the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest. The thought of losing him had been too much to bear. But as the days dragged on, Danielle found herself praying, not just for his survival, but for the chance to undo the past. To have him wake up and look at her, his eyes soft with understanding, not anger or disappointment. She didn't know if it was hope or desperation that kept her coming back, day after day, but she couldn't stop. Each visit, each whisper to him, was a silent plea to bring him back, to give them both a chance to rewrite their story. And as she sat there, her fingers lightly tracing the lines of his hand, she couldn't help but wonder if this was her punishment, for all the times she had kept him at arm's length when he had been so close to her heart. The first time Walter woke, it was like being pulled from the deep end of an endless ocean. His senses returned slowly, disjointed fragments of sound and feeling that didn't make sense at first. The beep of the heart monitor, the hiss of the oxygen mask pressed to his face, the smell of antiseptic, all of it felt unreal, like he was still caught in a dream. His limbs were heavy, weighed down by the kind of fatigue he had never known, and a sharp pain throbbed behind his eyes. His body felt foreign to him, like something had been ripped from him, something vital and whole. And then there was her. The soft rustle of fabric, the quiet sobs, the tremble in her voice. It reached through the fog of his mind.
Danielle.
She was there, sitting beside him, her hand brushing against his, her voice low and desperate, like she was trying to hold on to him. He heard it all, though he couldn't move or speak. He heard the words she whispered, each one cutting through him like a knife, raw and unguarded. I love you, Walter. I've always loved you. It was like being struck by lightning. The words had never been spoken aloud, not by her, not by him. Their connection had always been charged with something unspoken, something dangerous, but in that moment, with her heart laid bare, everything changed. The truth hung in the air between them, a revelation that neither of them had been ready for, yet both had always felt. His chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't place.
Love.
Was that what this was? What he felt for her? He had spent so long keeping himself distant, locked behind walls of control and calculation. His life was built on power, on domination, on a cold, unyielding force. He had never allowed anyone to get close, never let himself feel anything that could be used against him. Not even her. But now, as he lay there, immobilized and vulnerable, he realized that the one person he had pushed away the hardest was the one who had gotten to him the most. He had never truly let her in. He had wanted to, more than he'd ever allowed himself to admit. But something had always held him back. Fear, maybe, or the knowledge that letting someone close could destroy them both. He had made her think he didn't care, had kept his distance when all he wanted was to pull her closer. And now, hearing her confession, he was faced with the truth of his own feelings. Her words kept echoing in his mind as he lay there, unable to move, unable to respond. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to feel anything but the numbness of survival. But here it was, something new, something raw, something powerful. Danielle had always been his weakness, and now, in this moment, he was more vulnerable than ever. But it wasn't just about the danger he had put her in. It was about the connection they had always shared, the one he had never fully embraced. And now, as he fought to regain control over his body, he realized that he would never be the same. Everything had changed, and he would have to face it. The quiet that had settled over the hospital room after Walter's awakening was shattered the moment the phone rang. Danielle's hand froze, still resting gently on his. The sound of the ring echoed in the sterile room, louder than it should have been, and her heart skipped a beat. She had barely begun to process the weight of their unspoken words when the call pulled her back into the dangerous world that had almost swallowed Walter whole. Her gaze flicked to him, a silent question in her eyes. Walter, still weak but alert, looked toward her. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his body was unmistakable. He nodded subtly, signaling that she should answer, though she knew the world beyond the walls of this room was closing in on them. Danielle, the voice on the other end of the line growled. It was low and familiar, one of Walter's men. You need to leave the hospital. Now. A chill ran through her veins.
Why?
What's going on? Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but she could hear the unease in it. There's no time to explain. You're in danger. Walter's enemies, they're coming for you. The words hit her like a slap, and her chest tightened as she glanced down at Walter, whose eyes darkened with understanding. This was no longer just about him. It was about her too. Leave now, the voice insisted, his urgency growing. I'll have someone there in minutes.
Just go, now.
Danielle pulled the phone from her ear, her hands trembling as she stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. She knew the danger was always there, lurking in the background, but hearing it so plainly, so directly, made it real. Too real. She didn't have time to think. Her instincts kicked in, and she reached for her bag, her thoughts racing. She needed to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to move away from him. This was the world Walter lived in. Danger, violence, enemies on every side, but now it was her world too. And as much as she wanted to escape, she couldn't deny the pull that kept her tethered to him. Danielle, Walter's voice, hoarse from disuse, pulled her back. His hand, still weak, gripped hers. You need to go. They'll come for you. but they'll come for me first. She shook her head, her heart twisting at the thought of leaving him again, of walking away while his life was still hanging by a thread. But she knew what he meant. If she stayed too close, she would only drag him into more danger. His eyes locked onto hers, and there was a steel in them now, a determination that sent a jolt of fear through her. "I won't let them touch you," he said quietly, though the words held a promise that ran deeper than any he had spoken before. "But if you leave, I'll make sure no one touches you again." Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the depth of the choice he was giving her. The Mafia world would never let them go, and neither would he. The decision gnawed at Danielle as the days blurred into one another, each minute stretching endlessly before her. She sat in the quiet of the apartment, her gaze distant, fixed on the window where the rain had begun to fall, each drop tapping against the glass like the steady beat of a drum. It had been days since Walter's enemies had made their move, days since the threats had begun to pour in, threats not just against him, but against her. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest like a physical burden, and with each passing moment, she felt the noose tightening. She had seen the way Walter moved, the way he operated, since the moment they met. The power he wielded, the control he held over everything and everyone. And she had always known that his world was dangerous, that nothing about it was ever simple or clean. But now, as his enemies closed in on them both, she was forced to confront the reality of it all. The stakes had risen. The danger was no longer distant, no longer theoretical. It was here. It was real. Her thoughts returned to the hospital, to the way he had looked at her when he spoke those words, his voice a quiet promise. "If you leave, I'll make sure no one touches you again." She had thought she wanted peace, a life without fear, without bloodshed. But now, with Walter's gaze still burned into her memory, she wasn't so sure anymore. The apartment was a small refuge, a place that should have felt like safety. But all she could feel was the crushing weight of indecision. She knew what staying with him meant. She knew the cost: more violence, more bloodshed, more of the world he had lived in before. A world she would be dragged deeper into, whether she wanted it or not. There was no escaping the Mafia once you were in, no easy way out. But leaving him, turning her back on him now, it felt like abandoning something she had never truly allowed herself to have. Her heart, battered and scarred from years of self-imposed distance, had begun to soften around him. The walls she had spent so long building, brick by brick, were crumbling beneath the weight of the feelings she had suppressed for so long. She thought about what her life could be: peaceful, safe, simple. A life without the constant fear of looking over her shoulder, without knowing that at any moment the Mafia might come for her. But then she thought of Walter, of how, even in the midst of the chaos, he had always been there. How, despite the darkness of his world, he had made her feel seen, understood in a way no one else ever had. The rain fell harder outside, the steady rhythm of it a reminder of the ticking clock in her chest. She could walk away. She could run from this life, from him, from everything. But in doing so, she would lose something more precious than she could ever name. Danielle's fingers tightened around the cold glass of the window, her breath fogging the pain. The decision was hers. But with each passing second, the weight of it grew heavier. Could she truly leave him, knowing what he would do to keep her safe? Or would she step into his world, fully and completely, knowing the cost? In the silence of that moment, the answer was clearer than anything else. She couldn't walk away. She wouldn't. The tension had been building for days, an undercurrent of unease that hummed through the air like a storm on the horizon. Danielle could feel it in the way Walter's movements had become sharper, more deliberate, the way his eyes flicked to every shadow as if waiting for an attack that was inevitable. It was only a matter of time before the Mafia's rival forces made their move, and neither of them could pretend anymore that their world was anything less than dangerous. It was in the dead of night when it finally happened. The call came in hushed tones, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. Walter was on his feet in an instant, pulling on his jacket with a precision that made Danielle's heart race. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind scrambling to make sense of it. But deep down, she already knew what this was. This wasn't just about the enemies he'd made. It was about her, too. They were coming for them both. The drive to the safe house was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against her skin like a vice. Walter's gaze was focused straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his fingers tight on the steering wheel. She wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, to break the tension that had gripped them both. But every word she thought to speak felt hollow in her throat. There was nothing left to say that could make any of this easier. When they arrived, the air was thick with anticipation. The safe house was eerily quiet, the lights dim, and the heavy scent of old leather and wood filled the room as they entered. Walter moved like a man possessed, barking orders to his men, checking weapons, making sure every corner was covered. His world, this violent, dangerous underworld, was a place she could never fully belong to, but tonight, she was too close to the fire to turn away. The first shot rang out without warning, a sharp crack that shattered the stillness. Danielle's heart lurched as she instinctively ducked behind Walter. He was already moving, his body a shield between her and the danger that had arrived. More shots followed, faster now, the sound deafening. Walter's men were already engaging the attackers, but it didn't matter. The storm had broken, and they were in the middle of it. Danielle watched as Walter moved through the chaos, a force of nature in his element. His focus was absolute, his every movement calculated. But it wasn't the bullets or the violence that made her heart race. It was the way he looked at her in those fleeting moments when their eyes met, as if he were trying to keep her safe, trying to pull her into his world even as it threatened to swallow them both. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stop, to ask why he had to live like this, why he couldn't walk away from the bloodshed. But the words caught in her throat, drowned out by the noise, by the danger that was suddenly so close. When the gunfire finally stopped, the world seemed to hold its breath. Walter stood there, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the battle they'd just survived. His eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, she saw it, the cost of the life he led. He would do anything to keep her safe, even if it meant dragging her deeper into the storm. Danielle's heart pounded in her chest as she realized just how far he was willing to go. And for the first time, she understood. This was their world now. There was no turning back. The phone call came in the dead of night, the kind of call that shatters sleep and hurls you into a nightmare. Walter answered on the second ring, his voice already hard, measured, but with a strain beneath it that Danielle couldn't ignore. She sat up in bed, her heart beating too fast, her body alert despite the hour. "They've done it," Walter said, his voice low, almost clipped. His grip on the phone tightened, his jaw clenching in a way she recognized all too well. It was the same way he held himself when the world was on the brink of breaking, when everything he had built could come crumbling down. "What's happened?" she asked, though her voice felt small, like a whisper in the growing storm between them. "They've betrayed me," he replied, his words sharp as glass. "Someone close to me has been working with the Russians. They sold us out, Danielle. All of it." Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words hit her. The Russians, Walter's rivals, the ones who had been eyeing his empire for years. The ones who would stop at nothing to tear him down. But this was worse. This was treachery from within. Someone who had been trusted, who had been part of his inner circle, had turned on him. The thought of it sent a cold shiver through her. Walter's voice broke through her thoughts, more urgent now. "I need you to stay here, away from this. Do you understand?" But she didn't understand. How could she? How could she stay on the sidelines when everything they had built together was crumbling? The man she had fallen in love with, the man she had promised to stand by, was being torn apart from the inside. The betrayal wasn't just a blow to his empire. It was a personal wound, and Danielle could see it in his eyes, even across the room from her. She knew the kind of loyalty Walter demanded, the kind of loyalty he had always shown. And now, to have it ripped away by someone he trusted, the pain in his eyes was more than she could bear. "Walter," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm not leaving. Not now." His eyes snapped to hers, disbelief and something else, a raw vulnerability, flashing across his face. He was used to being in control, to being the one who dictated the terms of everything. To have someone defy him, someone who wasn't a part of his world but still loved him, left him speechless. "You're putting yourself in danger," he warned, his voice gravelly with a mix of frustration and desperation. But Danielle stood up slowly, closing the distance between them, her heart beating in her throat. "I don't care," she said, her voice unwavering. "I won't leave you. Not now, not ever. You've been there for me, every time, even when I pushed you away. I'm not walking away from you now." Walter opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Instead, he simply looked at her, the weight of the moment settling between them. It wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about trust, about standing by someone even when the world threatened to swallow them whole. And for the first time, Walter allowed himself to let go. Not of his control, but of the burden of pushing her away. She was here, standing beside him, and in that moment, it felt like a promise. A promise that no matter the betrayal, they would face it together. The tension in the air was suffocating, the kind that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. The quiet before the storm had lasted too long, and now, the storm was about to break. Danielle stood in the dimly lit room, the walls lined with the shadows of men she didn't know but could feel watching her. Walter's men, stoic and silent, stood like statues, their eyes fixed on the doors, waiting for the inevitable. She could hear the distant sound of engines, the hum of activity outside the safe house, but all she could focus on was the feeling that everything had led to this moment. She wasn't supposed to be here. She knew that. In a world like Walter's, a world filled with shadows and blood, there was no place for someone like her. He had always tried to protect her, to keep her safe from the violence that ran through his veins. But now, there was no choice. The rivalry with the Russian faction had escalated beyond anything Walter could control. The final confrontation had come, and it was more than just a battle for power, it was personal. The door opened, and Walter stepped inside, his presence like a force that shifted the air around them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, found hers immediately. She saw the weight of the world in them, the burden of all the decisions he'd made, all the bloodshed he'd endured. But there was something else, something deeper, something that made her heart ache. It was the uncertainty, the fear that she would leave, that she wouldn't be able to survive this. Without a word, he walked toward her, his movements as calm and deliberate as ever. But there was an urgency to him now, a fire that hadn't been there before. He stopped just in front of her, his gaze unwavering. "Stay close," he said, his voice low, almost a command. "I won't let anything happen to you." Danielle nodded, her throat tight. She didn't want to leave him. Not now, not when everything had come to this breaking point. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, grounding herself in the one thing she knew she could hold on to. But she knew deep down that this wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to herself and to Walter that she was strong enough to stand by him, to face the darkness that had always been a part of his life. The door opened again, and the room filled with the sounds of heavy boots, of men moving into position. Danielle could feel the air shift, the electric charge of impending violence that crackled between them all. The Russians had arrived. The final showdown was about to begin. Walter's eyes never left her as he turned to face the door. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice steady, "you stay behind me. You don't move. Understand?" Danielle's heart pounded in her chest, but she met his gaze with the same unwavering resolve. "I understand." The door burst open, and the first shot rang out, cutting through the silence with brutal force. Walter didn't flinch. He moved like a man possessed, his body a shield, his mind calculating, ruthless. And for the first time, Danielle stepped into the storm with him, her fear burning away as she stood by his side, ready to face whatever came next. This was the moment she had feared, and the moment she had chosen. There was no going back now. Only forward. Only them. The quiet after the storm was deafening. The sharp sounds of gunfire had faded, replaced by the distant hum of a world that seemed to move on, indifferent to the violence that had just unfolded. Inside the safe house, Danielle stood beside Walter, her body stiff from the tension that had held her captive throughout the battle. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins only moments ago was beginning to ebb away, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. The world outside was still and silent, but inside, it was as if time had paused, allowing them both a moment to breathe. Walter was silent beside her, his eyes focused ahead, his face still as unreadable as it had been when the fight first began. But there was something softer in him now, something more fragile than the man who had fought with the precision of a machine. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if every step he took was a reminder of the weight he carried. Blood stained his clothes, his face smeared with the marks of the battle, but none of that mattered. He was still standing, still alive, and she was still there. Danielle could feel the weight of their shared experiences pressing against her chest, but in this silence, she also felt the bond between them, stronger, deeper, more undeniable than it had ever been before. They had both come to the edge of something. The danger had passed, but it had left its mark on them, leaving them both irrevocably changed. She could see it in the way Walter moved, in the way he looked at her, as if he was unsure of how to move forward after everything they had faced. She felt it too, the strange sensation of knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. But as she reached for his hand, the contact between them seemed to ground them both. He looked down at her, his gaze softening, the walls he had always kept between them beginning to crack. In this moment, there was no violence, no power, no world of shadows. There was only the two of them, standing in the aftermath of everything that had happened. "I don't know how we got here," Danielle whispered, her voice rough from the emotions she hadn't let herself express. "But I can't walk away now. Not after everything." Walter's eyes softened, his thumb brushing over her hand in a way that made her heart tighten. "You're the only one who hasn't walked away," he said quietly, his voice thick with the weight of his own admission. "I don't deserve you, but I won't let you go." There was a rawness to his words, a vulnerability he had never shown before. Danielle felt it, his confession, his acknowledgement of the darkness he had brought into her life. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was that they were still here, still together. They had both been through too much to walk away from this now. The violence, the betrayal, the danger, it had tested them in ways they hadn't imagined. But through it all, something had endured. Their love, fragile as it may have seemed at times, had held strong. And in this quiet, in the aftermath of chaos, they found their peace. Not in the absence of danger, but in the presence of each other. There was no going back to what had been before, but there was still forward.
Still them.
And that, for the first time in a long while, was enough.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and be part of a community that cherishes unforgettable tales like this one. Your support means more than you know. It fuels the creation of even more stories that speak to the heart. So, whether you're watching from your TV or your phone, take a moment to join us. Every like, every subscription, every share helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for being a part of this journey.